Hey gang, I'm in North Hollywood today, North Hollywood, California, and I'm at a cemetery called Valhalla Memorial Park. Valhalla, like Viking heaven. It's got some pretty neat architecture here, I have to say. And the first thing that I noticed is this large structure here right up front with the dome. Look at that. Get a little zoom on that. Look at that. Now that's something you don't see every day at the cemetery. Well, we're here today to talk about a famous woman, well, infamous. She was a cult leader here back in the 1920s. Her name was May Blackburn, the Reverend May Blackburn. Now, rather than walking to her grave today, as we kind of usually do, I scoped it out, and there is just nothing to look at. It's all flat, and the footing is kind of troublesome. So we're going to hang out in this front area as I tell you a story, and we'll explore around here a little bit. There is a few things to see. So this is an area where, well, it's a focal point of the cemetery, you can see here. And if you look through, and I'll zoom, you can see what is looks like a miniature space shuttle. And as I tell the story, we'll go over there, we'll check it out. It's a beautiful little garden area here. So yeah, May Blackburn. She was a Midwesterner, actually, when she was young. She'd grown up in Iowa. Storm Lake, Iowa is where she was born, August 2nd, 1881. And basically the story on May Otis Blackburn was, in the end, she had become what was called the self-appointed queen and high priestess of this new religious movement here. And boy, there were a lot of them back then. But this one was one of the most infamous. Now, it went by many names. It went by what was called the Cult of the Great 11, or the Great 11 Club, the Divine Order of Royal Arms of the Great 11. But it was mostly known as the Great 11 or the Blackburn Cult. She was referred to as the heel of God. That's right, the heel of God. And it is said that they performed some real strange rituals, including the sacrifice of animals, of course, but there were sex scandals and worse, attempts at resurrections from people that, well, they went missing and were possibly murdered. Possibly being the key word. Going back to her upbringing back in Iowa, after she was born, the family moved all over the place in the Midwest. And in 1899, when she was 16 years old, she married a guy named John Weiland. Now, John was a gambler and an all-around piece of work, I guess you could say, because as he gambled, he just gambled all their money away. So they separated. He actually went away to seek his fortune in the gold fields. So she had a daughter, her daughter Ruth, and she went ahead and married another guy named Rudolph Schultz. And that is when they moved to Oregon. Now, her daughter Ruth, the whole time, thought that May, her mother, she thought that May was her grandmother. And the reason May would put on this farce was because this is how you could be eligible for rich men. You know, if you had a child, you wouldn't be as attractive. So she maintained this farce until Ruth was in her teens. It's unbelievable. Ruth thought that was her grandmother. So May was a con artist from a very early age. She had married another guy, and she made him pay her $150 a week in allowance. Of course, she didn't really love him. It was more of a marriage by convenience. And shortly thereafter, around the year 1900, she announced to this guy, Rudolf Schultz, that her former husband was not in fact dead. So her marriage to him was, hey, this marriage is invalid. I'm out of here. Then she met a lumber tycoon, very wealthy guy, Everett Fremont, another con, and on and on and on. That was her MO. And she made a lot of money. She made a lot of money doing it this way. She ended up making a film company in Portland, made a couple of films, and then they moved to LA, here in LA. And this is where it really started getting crazy. Ruth now would end up getting married, the daughter, and she was actually supporting the entire family doing these exotic dances. Like an Egyptian, walk like an Egyptian. She had married a guy named Jack Rickenbaum. But of course, soon after, she separated from him and started dating other men. And by the way, here is the Space Shuttle. This looks pretty authentic. Now, what is this doing in a cemetery, you ask? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But it is pretty authentic looking. To say the least. Even with the landing gear coming down for landing, that was probably a gift or a donation. And they have night lights here. Wonder what goes on here at night. All right, we got the music going. And he's out of here, in and out. Doesn't like the look of this place. Speaking of this place, check this out. So there's a huge arch here. Let's go in. The gate is open. And I will continue with the story. So she separates, she's dating other men. But around that time, something triggered with May. She was on to her next huge con. This would be the ultimate con. So the first thing she does is she puts her daughter up, Ruth, to ask her boyfriend at the time, a guy named Arthur Osborne, for money to help finance a book that May is writing that's going to solve all the world's problems. Now you know where this is probably going. Now get this, the book was said to tell how you would live forever, how you could find hidden gold and gems, and later you could add oil wells, by the way. We'll talk about that. And you would get the last measurements of Solomon, which would allow you to do anything you want in life. Of course, right? Further, it was said, she said, that the angel Gabriel had been appearing to her and her mom each night, dictating this book to them, what to write. And when the book was finished, it would bring about the apocalypse, which was going to happen February 1925, which actually was the same date. There was another famous woman here. I think she was a split off from the Latter-day Saints that said the world was going to end. Of course it didn't end, but anyway, that's another story. So, you know, this young kid, Arthur, he thought it was strange, but he wanted to keep dating Ruth, so he basically gave her all his money. Of course, that wasn't enough. She said, "Can you give me more? You don't have any more? Can you go to your employer and borrow money?" He worked at Sanchez Ranch, so of course he did that. But afterwards, after he gave this loan, it was a loan, he got $150. He kind of figured he was getting taken advantage of, so. And then, of course, she told him, she said, "Well, it's not just for the book. We need to set up a whole religious order. We need to build buildings." Now, while all this was going on, Arthur got fired because he didn't repay the loan. He didn't have any money. So he told his dad about it. So his dad goes to the house and he confronts her. And he's like, "You know, you've defrauded my son. You give that money back right now or else." And she's like, "Or else what? I'm going to tear your heart out." Like she went ballistic. And he was like, "Whoa." And then she called her. He said he called after he finally left, and he was scared, as anyone would be. She called on the phone. She called his wife, Arthur's mom, and said, "If he shows up again, I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to kill you too." Nice. Well, they ended up writing the book. Actually, they were writing a bunch of books. And that's when they started recruiting disciples. Yes. That is when they started recruiting the people that would be the gullible ones. And there were a lot out there. They were ready to buy. The apocalypse was coming. But the world that we would be living in from there would be transformed. It would be a transformation result. It would be another type of world. And in that world, there's going to be 11 queens, selected, of course, by Gabriel. And the queens are going to rule the world. And by the way, Gabriel had promised the 11 queens that they'll get 11 mansions that will be built on an olive hill here in Hollywood. And of course, each of the 11 queens are going to have 12 kings, like a harem. 12 kings each, not 12 kings total, 12 kings each. Does this sound like a pyramid scheme, guys? Maybe a little bit. And of course, they're going to be given all the gold and jewels in the world and great powers. I mean, what would the jewels be worth without great powers? Now, 99 out of 100 people are going to look at this and laugh, but there's always one or two. And after a while, those are going to add up to a little group. Now, sometimes she would get challenged. And they would say, you know, how's the book coming? What's going on? And what she would do is, "Oh, come see the chest." She had this giant chest she would open. And in the chest were reams of paper, all wrapped in twine, like scrolls. And of course, there was the one on top had a bunch of writings, you know, that didn't mean anything, but it looked like the Holy Scrolls. And that was the only paper. Yeah, he didn't. It's kind of like a stack of money that's fake, and the top one's a $100 bill. So she was smart. She had that whole group tricked, and she showed that chest many times. They were fascinated. They were like, "Oh yeah, this is going to be an unbelievable book." And that's how she got all her money, of course, because that's how a cult works. They take all your money. Schemes get bigger and bigger. More rich men would come on board. And then people started disappearing. That's right. Maybe they were poisoned, like Samuel Rizzio, Ruth's boyfriend, and I think later to be husband. Well, as things progressed, you know, the house of cards is always going to come down. And it did in this case when one of the members, whose name was, he was a Silver Spoon guy. He was the son of an oil heir. His name was Clifford Dabney. And he had to be a really gullible guy. She was good. She had him taken in like everybody else. She was like, hey, Clifford, you're going to be one of the kings. And when he started making a little trouble or asking too many questions, she'd give him like another little bone, like, and your family's going to have more power than the rest, and you're going to get more jewels. And he's the oilman, you know, he's the son of he had a bunch of oil leases. So he's thinking, oh man, I'm going to find out where all the oil is, and I'm going to be from stinking rich to filthy rich. So that's where greed comes in. You know, with people, you just start believing anything you hear. Well, it finally came to a head because nothing was happening and he was getting jerked around, and he finally called the police, the bunco squad, and they kind of laughed at him. They're like, well, okay, you got a reverend, you got a church, you gave her all this money. You know, that's your fault. But they investigated it. And of course, when the media found out, oh, they loved a juicy story like that. Crazy cult, because there was talk of disappearances, there was talk of sacrifices. And at one point, there was a woman. This would eventually come out. Get this, guys. There was a woman, one of the members, that was was boiled in a stove. I don't know if she was in a pot, but it was boiled in a stove, boiled alive. And the whole idea was this resurrection thing. She was going to be resurrected. I wonder if she did agree to do that. Can you imagine? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. As I say, sometimes you hear something like that and go, wow. Then when the word got out, people, you know, relatives started calling up, hey, my aunt is missing. My son is missing. He never came home. And by the way, take note. Take note of this. I hope so. I hope that is the law here. And I would love to see somebody go down for that, especially the people that steal monuments, and that's a whole nother subject. But anyway, so here's what happened. Someone with all the publicity called up and said, hey, have you heard of this woman named Willa Rhodes? You need to go talk to her parents. Why? Because she's dead. She's dead. And there's worse. So they give the police the address to the parents, a William and Martha Rhodes. They go to their house. They're on the front steps. And they finally get them to break down. And now this whole thing is spilling out. They go to the bedroom. Well, they say she's in here. They go to the bedroom, and there, under the floorboards, they see the body in a chest. I think she was in a chest. The daughter was curled up in a ball, like her knees to her chest. She was surrounded with 7 puppies, her puppies. And by the way, the puppies were named after the 7 notes of the musical scale, because that was a key part. You know, Wilma was going to be a high princess or queen. Anyway, the dogs were named Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, or not, you know, the 7 notes. They said she looked like a porcelain doll, a white porcelain doll, because she had been kept on ice. I mean, here's what happened. If you know, spinning back, what happened was Willa was May's favorite, and all of a sudden she got a toothache. And you know, with those religions, they're like, well, no, you can't go to the hospital. And the toothache all of a sudden got really worse. And by the way, I'm just going to tell you, she was being poisoned for whatever reason. And they prayed, and she finally, it's really sad, she finally died. So they're like, she told the parents, she said, she's going to be resurrected, you know, because she's one of the queens. And she's the tree of life. And as the tree of life, we need to preserve her body until that day that God decides, or Gabriel decides, that she's going to come out. She's going to come out of the box. So they had her in the bathtub for I don't know how long. Months. Well, it was 14 months in total. And the police arrived. They had 600 pounds of ice delivered to the house every week to keep her preserved. And it was just crazy. And she was wrapped in fresh flowers and herbs and other embalming techniques that May said, she said, oh, we're going to embalm her. When they did it, she said, we're going to embalm her the same way they embalmed the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, last I checked, Jesus Christ was not embalmed. But anyway, if you're going to believe the other stuff, you're going to believe that. You're going to believe whatever she tells you. Can you imagine sleeping every night wondering when your daughter is going to start knocking, when she is resurrecting? So everything comes out. May and Ruth, well, May gets arrested, and I think then Ruth got arrested. And now the occult is accused of all these horrible things, including killing a member, that member in the oven, that came out. Poisoning of another during a whirling dervish ceremony, whatever that is, and making other members disappear, which you know what that means. In 1929, they were indicted here in Los Angeles for grand theft, you know, from the oilmen. And the investigation started of the missing members, which they really, in those days, they really had no luck in figuring anything out. So they pursued the grand theft, and they had the trial, and they got a guilty verdict and off to jail. May went off to jail, but guess what? Her brilliant defense attorney, he gets her off. And how does he do it? He goes to the Supreme Court, which I guess everybody had access to back then. He said, you know what? This purported murders and poisonings and this and sacrifice, there's no evidence for that. This trial should be focused on grand theft. We'll admit to that. We need to focus like a laser beam on that. And the ploy was, Supreme Court agreed. And they found that there was no grand theft because it's a church. And if you're stupid enough to give these people all your money, that's your tough luck. So she got exonerated. Out of prison. Bam, bam, bam. And on the cult went. Now, of course, she couldn't really attract any new members. Well, she couldn't attract members after all the publicity, any members that were rich. You know, you need that money to feed. So it slowly, the whole thing kind of slowly died off. But she got away with it. All that stuff, man. All right, I'm going to jump ahead. We're going to go to her grave, pay last respects. I'll turn it back on when we get there. As promised, we are at the grave. We have found it here, and it looks like she is with her parents, mother and father here. This is her father, Walter. Walter was, well, he passed in 1941. That's when we entered World War II with the attack by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. So he died that year. Interesting. And then we have the mother here, Jenny. Jenny Blackburn. She passed in 1931. And if I recall, her middle name was Goodness. Goodness. Well, that's not the name that we can attribute to this one here. That May Blackburn, and you see it says Reverend, which, by the way, I'm not going to acknowledge this like a made-up name. Right over the runway here, and I can tell you that Mayo Blackburn is not resting in peace, as these jets are taking off every 2 to 3 minutes now, and I think that's justified. Yeah, she passed away here in 1951, and I'm sure she is not resting in peace. This woman is responsible for many deaths and many hardships of many people. She ruined many lives, and she is responsible for the death of many people, the torture and death. It's reprehensible. So there's no rest in peace here, and she is probably with where she belongs, at the gates of you-know-where, the place with a lot of fire. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up here at Valhalla. I am going to try to find, if I can, we'll continue here if I can find Willa's grave, and we'll go there next. Otherwise, it's going to end here. See ya. I'm at Woodlawn Cemetery now in Santa Monica, and we did find Willa's grave here. She's with her parents, William and Martha. And there you can see the date, 1909 to 1924. Going to place a flower here for her. And this is Goodness. Willa was a beautiful woman, and she had a heart of gold, and she was good. So rest in peace, Willa. I'm glad we found you.